to Kokkie Kooyman. He's a portfolio manager at Denker Capital. Mr. Kooyman, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you've been following the social grants debacle. Postbank is saying to us, actually, we've paid everything out. When I spoke to the spokesperson earlier and I said, well, why are people on the ground not getting their money? He says, well, they shouldn't be going to the post office. They should be going to retailers. But it seems people have been sent from pillar to post. Do you have an understanding of what has gone so horribly wrong?
Yeah, well, as has just been said on the program, firstly, the service provider that provides the service and the software to load the grants onto the BankServe system, they weren't being paid. So they gave notice that they were going to discontinue their service until they were paid, and the post office disregarded, or the post bank, which is 100% owned by the post office, disregarded that warning and went ahead. Secondly,
sorry, can I just stop you there? How sure are you of that fact? And I'll tell you why I ask that. I was reading an article in Ground Up that related that, and that the reason Postbank was not able to pay the service provider is because the contract had not been properly put together. Then what happened is, in order to try and make sure that there wasn't a problem with payments, they had to go to court to basically say, look, we have the legal right to pay you even though the contract isn't properly constituted. My understanding is that that matter was actually resolved. Are you saying you have information that that is not actually the case?
No, most will be working on the same in regional information. I read all about the court case, etc., as well, but that hasn't been resolved. I think what is important in this whole issue is that there was notice given, and despite the time warning, the post office management or post bank management didn't go and resolve it. And rather relied on the court to resolve it. Yes, in the private sector, you will go to the provider and say, okay, let's make an interim solution. And whichever that wasn't followed. But it seems that the glitch really came because they then tried to use an alternative system of themselves. And in that system is where the failure occurred, because there are about 6.3 million recipients. And of those, only about 600,000 weren't paid, and that's being ignored. I mean, about, let's say, 5 million recipients were paid. And of those 600,000, a few days ago, there was 100,000 that still hadn't been paid. I hear those have been paid now as well, but I haven't got accurate information on that. But you are quite right. There's a lot of misinformation. SASSA card holders can actually go to a Pick n Pay. They don't have to go to a post office anymore. And a lot of the post office branches are closed because the post office is bankrupt. So I think there's a lot of misinformation as well in the system.
So what has been happening is that people would normally go to their Pick n Pay, but they encounter a problem. Then they go somewhere else. Then they eventually go to the post office because they go, well, this is the source of Postbank, because Postbank doesn't have its own actual banks. Talk to me about how people access their money, because you can have a system, and clearly from Nobusuthu's package, a lot of people are now saying, I'm going to take the bank charges, I'm prepared to accept that, and get my money paid directly into a private bank. Just explain the different ways people can receive their money.
Yeah, so the money is loaded onto a system, and that system is available on the SASSA card, or it can then, at your request, and you have to log in onto the SASSA system, you can switch it to a bank account. For that, obviously, you need to open a bank account first, and there are various options, and the banks have very low-cost bank accounts for specifically those low-volume transaction accounts. But you have to go to a bank and open an account, and then the money gets paid into that account. And that you obviously get your own bank card, which you can then use to withdraw the money from at the OTM of any bank, which does incur a charge, or you can actually just let the money lie there, or just use the account to make payments. But you've got to go onto the SASSA system, which allows you to then transfer from post office to the private sector.
Do you think that the private sector is better placed to help make these payments, or could this kind of problem have happened anyway?
No, I think it's a matter of management and responsibility. I think the difference between the private sector and government is simply that if the private sector, someone makes a mistake, you get disciplined. And if you make a mistake a second time, you get fired and your boss gets fired. There's accountability because there are shareholders behind the system who want to make sure that they can deliver because of competitive pressures. In government, sadly, we haven't got that, especially not in our government at this stage. There's no competitive pressure. There's no accountability. The people who made these mistakes and allowed combinedly for the payments not to happen will most probably not be disciplined. They will still have the job and they mostly still get a bonus. And so, in theory, in a good functioning government, that can help, but your private sector is always more reactive to when things go wrong.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Kokkie Kooyman. He's a portfolio manager at Denker Capital. Let's move now to KwaZulu-Natal.